Coming. Welcome to this event, which is, as you know, the third annual event of the Centre for Public Engagement here at Queen Mary. We're also celebrating the completion of the phase of RCUK funding for public engagement here, and very grateful we are for that. As Charlotte has said, there are some posters downstairs which reflect some of the activities, but in a sense we are looking forward as much as looking backwards in this event. We do have a new public engagement strategy coming out later this year, and there has been a consultation on that, a review of approaches to public engagement across the university. And indeed, in the posters downstairs also, there is an opportunity to make further contributions to that. All of this, of course, is in the background of public engagement being thoroughly embedded in what we do at Queen Mary. In both the previous and the current strategies, we made it clear that public engagement activities were not an optional add-on to academic activities, but very much in the mainstream of academic activities, in our terms expressed as a part of the knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination continuum. And there are, I think, a number of implications of that general philosophy that we adopt here. The first is that public engagement is a valued and rewarded component of academic activity, not, as I say, an optional add-on. And also, I think, an important corollary of our approach is that the distinction between public engagement and other forms of knowledge dissemination becomes quite blurred, and I think is all the better for that. I think we should welcome that blurring of the distinction. But this then prompts a variety of questions which I think we should and can productively pose and answer. Does it matter that there is a blurred distinction between public engagement and other forms of knowledge dissemination? I would argue not, but it's an interesting point to reflect on. Where does knowledge dissemination in other forms end and public engagement begin, and does that matter? When we talk about public engagement, who are the public? I was reflecting earlier with our keynote speaker that as far as medieval history is concerned, I think I am emphatically a member of the public. When it comes to my own specialization, I like to think I'm not. But of course that emphasizes the fact that the dividing line between what we call the public and what we call academia is a very blurred one. And I think that's productive, but it needs to be handled in the appropriate way. And we might even question whether public engagement is still a useful term. I can't think of a better one, but is it the right term to describe what we are trying to do? Now, all of these questions, I think, are valid questions to ask. I would argue that Queen Mary is particularly well placed to ask such questions and is particularly well qualified to provide answers, given the record of success we have in diverse activities in public engagement. And one thinks, of course, of the People's Palace projects, the Centre of the Cell, Computer Science for Fun. The list is very long, and it's no coincidence, of course, that I've chosen 3 examples there that represent each of our 3 faculties. So at Queen Mary, we'll continue to explore the fit of public engagement as a component of our academic activities, and we will, I believe, continue to lead the way in this area and continue to think about what it means and how we do it. I would suggest that one key component of our thinking is that we should avoid taking an over-compartmentalized approach, and that's been, I think, implicit in some of the remarks I've made already. But I think we should also avoid thinking of public engagement as being solely described according to what one might describe as a linear model, where you do the research, you've got your discovery, and then you process those results, and finally you do public engagement. That model is simply inadequate in many cases, and one thinks here of areas such as the increasing emphasis on population scale medical genomics, where public engagement actually precedes the research as well as coming after the research. So the old linear model is too simplistic, and we need to reflect that sort of thing in our thinking. Well, with those preliminary remarks and reflections, which I recognize pose as many questions as provide answers, let's move on to the main turn, as it were, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor John Womersley to give this afternoon's keynote presentation. Professor Womersley is a graduate of Cambridge and Oxford with a DPhil in experimental particle physics, And he has played a leading personal role in particle physics research both in Europe and the US. He is now Chief Executive Officer of the Science and Technologies Facilities Council, the STFC, and he is responsible, therefore, for setting the direction of the Council and winning the support of external stakeholders, including, I'm sure, preeminently the government, to convince them of the vision of STFC as an enabler of world-class science with social and economic impact. Now, he is also, most relevantly for this afternoon, the Research Council's UK champion for public engagement with research, providing advice and leadership across all the research councils and acting as a public representative in this area for RCUK. So I'm delighted to introduce John to give this afternoon's presentation, and I thank you, John, for coming to do this. The presentation is entitled Public Engagement with Research, the RCUK's Funder Perspective. John.
So apologies for the slightly dry title. Why should you care what the funder's perspective is? Well, it is why we support these activities and why they're important. And I think perhaps that's self-evident, but is worth pointing out. So can I steal your space bar or something? Yeah. There we are. So let me just, before I go into this, because this is a rather corporate slide deck, and I wanted to reflect on some of the remarks that we've just heard. To some extent, we've moved on over the past 5 years or so, maybe the decade, from a concept of research is not finished till you've communicated it, which is absolutely true and remains as true together as it ever was, to we need to be engaged broadly with society about everything we do. We as researchers, we as higher education institutions, we as individual university staff. And public engagement has moved with that as well. We used to talk about science in society. We used to talk about public understanding of science. I don't want to underemphasize those things because they're a vital part of what we do. But much more, we're thinking now about broad engagement with the community, with stakeholders, with those who we need a social license to operate from. And as you're saying, what is my job? To some extent, it is public engagement. 40 hours a week, well, I wish it was only 40 hours a week. Talking to government, to new ministers, to those who would support research if they are convinced of its value. Because that is just as much public engagement with research as it is talking about talking to the public about the fruits of investigations or the scholarship or getting their input into those things. So very broad definition, which means that public engagement is not something one does at the end of research. Absolutely, it's something one does before writing the grant. It's something one does, while talking to one's friends in the pub. It's something one does daringly, talking to other disciplines about what one does. I gave a talk to a particle physics conference last autumn. Particle physicists like myself love to communicate the understanding of the universe, the interesting things we found out about what happened 13.8 billion years ago in the Big Bang. We find it much easier, I certainly do, to talk to the quote-unquote general public about these kinds of things than we might do talking to medical researchers or to other kinds of physicists. Partly because it's much easier to share the wonder with those who are not partly familiar with it and to whom therefore everything you say is new and exciting, but also because there's a slight tension about the amount of money we wish to spend on these things, and let's be open and honest about this. So we have to learn to communicate to many audiences. We have to learn to appreciate and understand their concerns, and we have a measure of success then is taking this into a sort of stakeholder engagement about everything we do at every stage of the process. And so with that background, let me then get in. Oops, sorry, I'm already here. So RCUK, the research councils agree to work together and collectively when it makes sense to do so. And we work individually in subject-specific areas. So Medical Research Council, for example, is older than the BBC. It has a very proud history, and it has a clear name and focus about medical research. However, things like public engagement, because of that broad remit, makes sense to be done, at least partly, collectively together. So RCUK is the branding and name that the research councils have chosen when we work collectively and together, and we try to come up with a common approach where it makes sense to do so, while retaining the subject-specific focus when we're talking about individual science areas. So public engagement is therefore a mixture of common approach activities in things like the catalysts and the beacons and some of the things that I will talk about in a few minutes, and subject-specific activities where we're supporting the work that Tom and Becky have been doing at CERN, for example. That has come from STFC because it relates to particle physics, which is within the remit of one council. This is a complex, multidimensional landscape. I know we can and should make it work better, but it still, I think, works reasonably well compared with most other countries. So research councils support research, broadly defined, to include arts and humanities, economic and social studies. We spend about £3 billion per year of your money, or the public's money, to do this. And that is a not insignificant amount of money, but it is not as huge as 3 billion might appear, because the UK spends a significant amount on subsidizing rail travel for old age pensioners. It spends comparable amounts on transport. It spends comparable amounts on local government and so on. So research is not a negligible aspect of public spending. Total public spending per year in the UK is about 800 billion. So our 3 billion is not completely negligible, but it's not dominating the national debt. So don't panic. But we do need to make sure that that 3 billion delivers excellent outputs, because when we are supporting research, we want to be adding to the total of human knowledge and scholarship in a meaningful way. So our focus is on excellence, but our focus is also on excellence with impact, because this is not our own money. This is taxpayers' money. It's money that the public has vouchsafes to give to the government to use in this way, as long as it's confident that it's going to have a positive impact on the well-being of society. And the public values cultural enrichment, and the public does value understanding the universe, and when we go out and talk to them about their priorities, those are things that are valued, but the public also values jobs and prosperity and health and addressing societal concerns like aging and climate change and so on. So we do have to show that the research is not just racking up somebody's citation count in Nature and adding to somebody's CV, but it is also addressing the concerns. So public engagement is there right from the very beginning in obtaining, if you like, the license to spend the money and the continued support of the public through their elected representatives to make that funding available. So we do, we do all as researchers, but especially those of us who make the case for this, need to demonstrate a demonstrable contribution to society and the economy. And we certainly include public engagement as part of making that case, but as an impact in itself when we're changing people's attitudes. So RCUK, as I said, is a partnership of the 7 research councils working together. There's a collective RCUK public engagement program and strategy, which I will outline. Now, we benefit from, and to some extent, collude in the slightly fuzzy definition of what we do. We think it's an area where ambiguity is not necessarily a problem, and that's all right. But for the purposes of grants and deciding and defining what we do, we have a definition of public engagement, which is the myriad of ways in which the activity and benefits of higher education and research can be shared with the public. And sharing is not the same as telling about, but it does include telling about. It also, importantly, includes listening to, as you all very well know. And there's also been a sense that the public is not, just the proverbial man on the Clapham omnibus. It is increasingly in today's society self-selected interest groups. It is the local community whose concerns may be different. It is other research communities. It is international. It is decision makers. It is local businesses. It is all the people from whom we seek tacit support or financial support. It's a two-way process. It involves listening as well as telling. And the degree of listening in some research areas may be far more critical. If we're talking about genetically modified organisms, for example, listening may well have been something that wasn't done enough. In my own research area, where we're talking about the fundamental laws of the universe, they are what they are, and people generally enjoy the process of understanding about them. But then they do have concerns, as I said, about the resources that go into it and its relative priority with respect to other science areas. And again, we should be listening to those concerns, or issues, or whatever. So how do we support this then? What we're trying to do is make sure that society values and has confidence in research processes and outputs. As I said, that's critical around certain areas where we can see from the very beginning that there may be societal areas of societal concern may be addressed by research. We want then to make sure that researchers are in an environment where they find public engagement to be valued by their employers, in their career progression, by their peers, and an awareness of social and ethical issues is one of the factors informing research decisions. So my colleagues in the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council have explicitly included the concept of responsible innovation in their grant process, so that if one is writing a research proposal, for example, into how one might modify the Earth's climate by distributing small crystals in the stratosphere, one has to consider whether that is something not just that is technically achievable and an interesting publishable result, but its context in some sort of social ethical world, about whether such research would be used well, whether it would be used responsibly, and whether you have considered those factors. And considering those factors might include the inclusion of an engagement strand in your research project. It might include working with some social science people to understand how you might communicate this before the research reached a point where it appeared to the public to have gained momentum that made it something to worry about. It doesn't mean it wouldn't be supported, but it means it would be less likely to be supported if you had not considered those factors. So it is not just simply a one-way thing. And the last bullet point, which is very important and increasingly likely to be in the, dare I say, the political context of the new government that we've just inherited, is the training, skills, inspirational aspect of research in terms of workforce development, in terms of attracting more girls into research-oriented careers, into the future workforce that we will need in a knowledge-based economy competing globally. There are statements in the government's plans about millions of apprenticeships, about greater focus on engineering careers and so forth, and that is part of the engagement with research, is going out to schools and talking about it, not simply for awareness, but also in terms of future career choices. So we implement this vision with a number of concrete messages. Each research council has a royal charter, so hanging in my council chamber in the building in Swindon is a piece of parchment with a great big wax seal on it and a signature, Elizabeth R, at the bottom, that says, "We hereby establish the Science and Technology Facilities Council with the mission of supporting excellent research," blah, 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 and communicating that research broadly, or disseminating, or something like that. So it is part of the objectives which I am held to. Perhaps a slightly narrower and older definition of public engagement than the one that we use now, but it is there and we are expected to do that. So it's a clear part of our mission. We embody that then when we hand out research grants to say you have in accepting this funding, you have a duty to publish the results broadly and disseminate them with the science community, but also to share them more widely than that with the public. And we have a few mechanisms in place to support that. Most obviously, the grant funding of research does allow you to bid for the resources to disseminate it. Some research councils like STFC have dedicated grant streams to support the public engagement activities around big research projects, and we spend a few £1 million a year, so of order 1% of our budget doing that, and that's, I think, a very good investment and something that I have every intention of continuing. And then we have specific good practice that's incorporated in things like the Concordat for Public Engagement with Research, where all of the research funding bodies in the UK have signed up to, which sets common expectations for the bodies that we support, like universities, of how they should support their individual researchers, how they should encourage people and use this as you should be part of a promotion, it should be part of what researchers are expected to do and not seen as something you have to do at weekends and evenings in your spare time without the support of your bosses and so forth. We want to encourage research communities to engage with the public, and we want to provide good practice and some real funding to enable us to do that. So the Concordat, as I've said, is a statement of best practice. It was based on fairly wide consultation before it was enacted, and it's been in place now for about 5 years. Fairly large number of bodies have signed up to it, including academies, including the Wellcome Trust and other charitable bodies, including the university funding councils all across the UK, 52 signatories and supporters, museums, BIS, the Wellcome Trust, etc., etc. And it lays out principles, it lays out reasonable expectations, and all of you should be, as university staff, should be able to appeal to that. That's what you're supposed to be encouraged to do and supported to do, and good practice and principles laid out. Now, I don't think for this audience I really need to convince you that public engagement is a good thing, but this should provide some sort of reminder of the many ways in which public engagement benefits. It benefits the public, and I'm not saying this in a patronizing way, but should empower in the sense of giving some connection with research decisions before they're all laid down, influence the direction of research, help them act as informed citizens in making tough choices about reproductive technology, about climate change, about government policy, etc., broaden attitudes and understanding. Researchers will benefit from this. It's fun. I don't want to underestimate the enjoyment part. I think almost everybody who goes out and talks to young people, to a broader audience, will find it enjoyable. It gives you a broader awareness of the context in which your research is being conducted and how proposals may be reviewed. You may indeed benefit from that in terms of designing your research. It will, in principle, it offers the way to improve research quality by bringing in the public in terms of co-creation of research or even using them to do the research. Schools are an important aspect of this. As I mentioned, future skills base, supporting the future skills base and inspiring next generation of researchers. But schools also, from my own experience, that is the purest, most challenging audience you can engage with. It's also one of the most enjoyable. And we are now working to bring the sort of co-creation of research aspect into schools, into sixth forms and so on, where real science, real publishable science can be done in that attitude. So a few examples of that. This aerospace engineering project in Southampton, Kenji Takeda, who actually did a competition for young people around green aviation in the future, and encouraged school children to think about how you could produce a zero emissions aircraft and so forth. And it's not necessarily the fruits of peer-reviewed research, but very good ideas came out of it that have been incorporated into the research project. And the idea of involving the next generation of potential researchers in a real EPSRC funded project from the beginning was certainly beneficial to the university, beneficial to the schools, and beneficial to the researcher, because he says he actually got new ideas out of this that he wouldn't have had on his own. The quote there from a researcher at Cardiff, again, coming up with ideas, ways of doing things that would not have otherwise arisen, and the recognition in your community more broadly from going out there and talking about it. The skills development aspect, of course, of public engagement is something that we shouldn't underestimate either. These are challenging audiences, but also very, very rewarding to talk to, and one can develop presentational skills, one can learn not to use jargon, one can learn not to talk only to one's peers, because if that's the way you do it with an unfamiliar audience, you won't get anywhere. And I think most of us who've spent any time talking to public or let's say less familiar stakeholder audiences, the first time we did it, it didn't go particularly well. And we have all learned much better how to present to any audience from presenting to public audiences and listening to what they say. A few other case studies here. Nancy Rothwell talking about research involving experiments in her area in life sciences that would not have been done without engagement, making researchers think much more about designing their projects, about addressing concerns as part of the research project, rather than the typical research and then think about what you might do with it sort of linear model. Chris Lintott, who you may have heard of through The Sky at Night and so on, has this crowdsourcing project called Galaxy Zoo, which involves the processing of very large numbers of astronomical images and involving public or volunteer labor, if you like, in that process. This is an engagement project at some level because it draws people into an interesting aspect of astronomy, but it's also a way of getting the research done. Instead of having to have a large number of postdoctoral researchers scanning through these things, he has involved the public in real research, and that's a grey area, or an area of wonderful win-win between research done by the public and research done with the public and telling the public about research. One doesn't need to choose between these things. The same can be done in research where you need a large number of people out in the field, impact of climate, impact of flooding, wildlife, pollution, for example. We can send people out there with mobile phones with an app that you might download and collate their results. And there are potential biases, of course, because some people will be more assiduous than others and so on, but those can all be worked through, and it's a great way to co-design research. So moving on, public engagement activities can be part of the impact studies that researchers can use in the REF and in other ways of demonstrating the impact of research. Not every public engagement activity will be something that the university would want to showcase as a REFable activity, but in my field, in physics, two of the highest profile REF impacts case studies, one of them was Brian Cox, as you might imagine, but the engagement activities at Jodrell Bank, stuff that have been done there, those were right up there, along with all the technology and all of the spin-out stuff that you would think of more traditionally as impact. So this is exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for, and it's entirely eligible in Research Council funding terms. This is the Pathways to Impact webpage, which talks about how to write a proposal, and you can look at this when you need to. Now, we also support some coordinating activities which are aimed at stimulating culture change, and that's an awful jargony way of saying it, but we have, over the last 5 to 10 years, discovered that barriers to public engagement are often in the culture of the higher education institution, and I'm not pointing a finger at this one, but in the system, funding may be a barrier, absence of funding, but also absence of support, absence of encouragement, absence of best practice, absence of a sense that it was a valued activity. And so the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement in Bristol is one of the things that, one of the entities, one of the activities that RCUK has supported, along with a significant number of other partners, to develop best practices, to collate and collect good examples of this, to create an evidence base, to organise meetings and stimulate the community, the broad higher education community in the UK, to work here. And NCCPE has certainly come up with the concept that it's not just about public engagement with research, it's about broad stakeholder engagement with the broad range of things that we do. And they have the concept of the engaged university, and you could say, engage with who about what, and that's exactly the point. You need to be engaged with everyone about everything. Not in a, spread think broadly about what we mean by the public, think broadly about what we mean by research, and think broadly about what stage of the research cycle we engage. And that's absolutely fine, and I'm very happy with that. In terms of researcher development, we support activities like through VITAI around skills development, around providing some structure of researcher development, where public engagement is seen as an important part of the training cycle that's provided to postgraduate students, to postdoctoral researchers, and younger career researchers, and to help areas of improvement, so you don't just learn by failing, though learning by failing is not a bad way of learning, but the support is provided and help is provided. We have a number of strategic investments, and these are less than we would like, because the amount of money that we have to spend overall is less than we would like, but I think it's big enough to have had an impact. We support Schools University Partnership Initiative, which I'll talk about in a little while. We support a number of initiatives to inspire the next generation of researchers through research placements and individual research, and we support some public dialogue activities through initiatives with government. So particular example of culture change is the Beacons for Public Engagement, which was a 3-year program running from 2008 to 2011 in a number of universities to create best practice examples with significant funding to support public engagement for the whole institution across the whole breadth of research. Unfortunately, we were not able to continue at that level of support following the spending review in 2010, so we came up with a smaller continuation program called Catalyst, and Queen Mary has been one of those Catalyst universities, and that supported the Centre for Public Engagement here, and there's good examples of the excellent work that you have done downstairs that are being showcased. Of course, what we were hoping is that you would become addicted to these things, or you would see the value, and I'm very pleased that this university has indeed seen the value of continuing this activity when the RCUK funding ended. So like the heroin dealer who gives you the first bag for free, so I am told, maybe in this area, no, I'm not going to go say that. We've got you hooked on the idea that public engagement is of benefit to the university in itself and to the research community, and once the processes are in place, you want to continue them, and that was part of the idea. These are catalysts that would stimulate, and of course, we're very pleased that that's happened. So these 8 universities listed here have been funded. We now have a number of 1-year small catalysts that have been additionally supported in universities that were highly ranked on the original round, but not sufficiently highly ranked to be funded. And I do have to say that all of the future programs in this area are dependent on the outcome of the cross-government spending review that we expect to follow the elections. So I cannot make big promises about the scale of future initiatives in this area, but we do have every intention of continuing to support these kind of activities because they have been seen as very successful. We have a number of schools, university partnership activities, as I said, including the SUPI initiative, including support for science fair, for research placements, for the Association of Science and Discovery Centres. You can reach a very, very large number of young people by reaching teachers. There is a multiplication factor, teachers in the front row here, who know that very, very well. So curriculum support, researchers interacting with tools, things like STEMnet, who provide STEM ambassadors to move into schools and so forth, are all vital components of this. Now, to some extent, that is quote-unquote easy, because we're involving people who often want to be involved. The harder thing for the research community is to seed an element of control over the research activities that we ourselves would like to carry out. But in certain areas, that is obviously desirable in order to maintain the social license to do the research that we would like to do. Obvious areas that would fit in that category are listed here. We've seen this around open data, around making people's medical data available. One can design a technical solution, which in a purely technocratic world would obviously be, quote-unquote, a good thing to do, putting everybody's DNA in one great big database, for example. And we've also found that makes the public justifiably very worried, concerned about how this may be used. And so stem cells, human reproductive technology, use of animals in research, health research in terms of identifiable individuals, personalized medicine are worrisome things, even if from a purely are there benefits test, yes there are, but are those benefits clearly enough articulated? Do those benefits come with cost to those who may not benefit? Are there ethical concerns about how the data might be used by others once it's been gathered for the research project, and so forth? Space weather is listed there, not necessarily because it has ethical concerns, but because this is a risk area that people may not be aware of. And we've had an interesting, massive solar storms that might destroy satellites. We discovered then that this rather upset the satellite industry when research in this area was carried out. So it's not always the public who get upset, but one worries about the economic impact of the research or its impact on business sectors. Global food security is not necessarily something where there is such a concern for UK researchers, but there's obvious questions that come up about the societal/ethical aspects of patentable crops, of coming up with solutions that may address what looks like a a global nutritional problem out of which some multinational may make a very large amount of money. And so these are all areas where there are entirely legitimate public concerns about how is the research designed, and at some level, if we're not careful, whether it should be done. All of this has to be thought of in an international context, because the research may not be done in the UK, it may nonetheless be done somewhere else. And the public dialogue is one technique to have that conversation. It is not a way to change the public's mind. This is not about going out and convincing people that genetically modified crops are a good thing. It is much more like a focus-based approach where one gets a representative panel, or preferably a number of panels, broadly representative of the public, and has an in-depth conversation about the research and what one plans to do and what it might mean. And the researchers, or the public policy, or the government are those who are influenced. So it is really not about changing the mind of the public, but about changing the mind of the scientists. And that's why I mean it is difficult. It is quite often about changing the mind of the government, who usually see, or often see, research as something that needs to be out there and implemented and delivering those benefits. And again, if that can be more clearly articulated about the social license to do so around collecting data, for example, it's much more likely to lead to good public policy. So that's something that's quite important. That's something that research councils have been involved in. Those in biotechnology, for example, have been in this world for a long time. Medical research has been in this world for a long time. Physicists are starting to find ourselves in this world when we're talking about very large computer systems, or the collection of very large amounts of data, or climate geoengineering, fracking. All of these things are, they're up there and out there. And this is a good thing. This is not something we should be afraid of. It's part of having an informed public, and it's something we should welcome and involve. And we have found that the co-creation of research, involvement of local communities in research, and so on, is actually a very good way to start that conversation about topics that may be, quote-unquote, more difficult, because it creates a mutually trusting relationship with the university, with the higher education institution. So, like everything, you shouldn't wait until you have a really tough issue before you start to build the relationship. The relationship should be there before you need to build the tough issue. So part of having a broader relationship between our higher education and research system and our public will enable us to deal more broadly with these kind of difficult issues as they arise. So it's worth it. So to conclude, and I've probably talked for far too long, the Research Council, separately and together, all believe that public engagement is an integral part of research. It has broad benefits. It enhances research quality and impact. It enhances public understanding and awareness, and it improves the quality of what we do. We are committed to engaging the public with research. One measure of commitment is that we put money behind it. I know you wish we put more money behind it, and so do I, but I wish we put more money behind everything we do. And we will certainly be seeking to continue this in a significant way in the future. And we acknowledge that there's a great deal. I thank you all for the great deal of excellent public engagement work that you have done. QMUL is seen as a high-quality institution with a high commitment to public engagement, and there's a lot of very excellent work that's being discussed today. So thank you all very much, and we should celebrate that, and I think that's a cue for going and having a drink. So thanks very much. But we wouldn't be engaged if we didn't have questions, right? So
not just yet, John.
Yeah.
Drinks come later. We do have a few minutes for questions. If anyone would like to raise any issues, please.
Thanks. David Berman, I'm a physicist. I was intrigued how you emphasized this whole spectrum between knowledge dissemination and impact and public engagement. But my understanding is that the STFC don't want to use the pathways to impact money for public engagement. Could that be clarified, perhaps?
Yeah, so again, I've tried to give a joined-up RCUK view. The reason STFC has some specific public engagement funding. Now, that doesn't mean we wouldn't support through a consolidated grant public engagement activities. So we're quite happy for the PI to use up to some fraction, and I forget what the exact terms and conditions apply. And if you want to use some of your particle physics time and effort to go out and do public engagement, I certainly would not want to stand in the way of that. But we do have dedicated schemes to support it. And the reason we do that is because the projects that we support tend to be very big and very long term. So the public engagement should also be a relatively big or seriously thought through long-term activity, and we want to provide a dedicated grant scheme to do that. There are indeed some other research councils that take a similar view, but if you're an EPSRC funded researcher with a shorter timescale grant cycle, they fold the grant, the PE funding into that grant cycle. It's a way of working that matches the community. So you're the recipient of a dedicated STFC public engagement grant for that reason. So.
I'm Jane. I'm kind of interested in how you got into this world. Were you in the area that you were in and you fell into it, or was it something that you were always interested in?
Well, my life has been a random walk from one role to another. I come from a big science background in working at CERN and in these big projects. It has always been an important part of my understanding of why we're doing that kind of work, to go out and explain to a broad public, but also to those who fund it, those who support it, why this is worth doing. Partly because I think it's not obvious always why it's worth doing. Why do we need to this Higgs boson that fills the universe with energy? Why does that matter to any of you? And so part of the challenge of my own research background is wanting to communicate it. But I've certainly discovered in running a research council that it's a measure of, am I running the research council well, and are we running a good research system? Do we have a way of propagating this knowledge outwards to all those relevant audiences and all these relevant stakeholder groups? Can I maintain public support for what we do? Can I maintain governmental support, community support, higher education institution support, support from other science communities, all of this stuff about broader and broader stakeholder groups? So it is selfishly useful for me in doing my job both as a scientist and as an administrator of science to learn about and promote and support public engagement. But the main reason I do it is that arrow that I had bottom left on that original thing. I started out enjoying, my personality profile. I like standing up in front of an audience and sharing some of my knowledge with them and listening to what they say back. And I think for most people who get involved in public engagement, that is really one of the prime motivations. It is hard to engage if you don't enjoy it. It's possible to, and people can learn to become better at it. But I think most scientists, most researchers, most scholars do actually enjoy sharing the fruits of their scholarship with others. They start out perhaps sharing it with a peer group and then discover that the broader you go, the more interesting it gets. So that, I think, is a pattern. It's enjoyable to me. I found that it helps me be good at my job doing it, and it helps, I think, it will help all of you, and I think the people you work with too, to go through that same journey. I don't think we should be selfish about our knowledge. I remember students, and I had to, this is a little bit apocryphal story if you don't mind, but an interesting one. I had two graduate students, neither of whom stayed in research. Both went off to work for the same company 1 year apart. The first one went off, wrote his CV, described his expertise in writing software, doing a lot of simulation and modeling and so on. Of course, he got hired as somebody who did a lot of simulation and modeling, and paid a lot of money, but never been promoted hugely in the organization. The next year, his peer, who'd done very, very similar research background and had a very, very similar objective record, presented himself in terms of communication, in terms of standing up in front of a challenging audience and disseminating his results and convincing his colleagues that what he'd done was right. And that guy is now vice president. So public engagement is a skill. It's something that's actually a valuable skill out in the quote-unquote real world. And I think that that's, again, part of researcher CPD that we kind of underestimate. You often say, you're a scientist and therefore you need to share your results. No, actually, you're somebody who enjoys sharing your results. And being a scientist is just what you're currently doing. So I think I wouldn't underestimate it at all in terms of future career value for everybody. Okay, I'll shut up.
Not just yet.
Okay.
One question here and then along the road. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Liz Bell from the Institute of Bioengineering here. I was very interested in what you were saying about the public dialogues, because in bioengineering, of course, we're working across a very broad spread of technologies, which are really quite radical in what they're intended to do. And I was wondering, have you got sort of any dialogues coming up in bioengineering areas that we could get involved in?
So the dialogues are, RCUK supports them through something called ScienceWise. So you can go to ScienceWise, I think sciencewise.org.uk or sciencewise.org. That's a research councils and biz government department which will co-fund and co-support. And there is a list, I believe, on the website of upcoming engagement activities. So BBSRC is certainly looking at stuff around synthetic biology. There's a general concern about human reproductive technologies, and the recent work on mitochondrial cells and so forth was indeed the fruit of a public dialogue exercise. We've been thinking about what are the upcoming horizon scanning about the things that people might be worried about, or sorry, legitimately concerned about. Sounds, worry sounds a bit patronizing. Data seems to be a big thing where people are concerned about not necessarily information which has not been existed or not been collected, but about whether it can be concentrated and processed in new ways. So this is not so much a new technology, but as the East German government used to collect all information possible about every one of its citizens, but because they were on 3x5 index cards, they never did anything very much with it. If you have all of that in a supercomputer, it starts to get a little scary. And so there's a sort of sense that it's not necessarily new technologies that drive these concerns. It may be the application of existing information. And certainly where health data is concerned, where personal DNA profiles are concerned, where personalized medicine is concerned, do you really want your doctor knowing exactly when you will die and not telling you because your personality profile says you couldn't deal with it? All of that is in principle possible. Yeah. Would you like to correlate the database of children who get free school meals with their future criminal records? No, you wouldn't. It has been done.
One last question.
Hello, my name is Maya. I'm from Careers. I was picking up on your previous answer, what you mentioned in your talk about encouraging high school students, for example, to go into research careers. And I was wondering how you feel, and based on your description of one of your former, I guess, PhD students who was someone who liked communicating and happened to be doing science. How do you feel the Science and Technologies Facility Council, Research Councils UK should be encouraging careers that don't carry out research, but apply research in world outside academia, which I prefer to the real world, which I think is very...
So thank you. I think you almost said what I would have said. 95% of our PhD students in areas like particle physics and astronomy end up working in business, in industry, in research roles typically, but certainly not always. Many of them work in numerical roles that exploit some sort of numerical knowledge, but we have done career tracing studies and found out where some of our PhD students have ended up, and a large number went to the city initially to work on numerical simulations and have gone into management roles, as you would expect. One of our former students works for MI5, and we have no idea what she does, and it's a she. We have lots of people who have gone into management careers because having a good communication and evidence-based mode of thinking is exactly what managers need. So this is very general training, and one shouldn't think of it as training for a future STEM skill. STEM skills are a useful part of being, useful part of having a successful and rewarding career. But as I said, 95% of our students don't continue in research, in academic research, but we've surveyed them. Do you regret the PhD that you did, or do you feel it was useful life skills that you continue to use? And 95% of that 95% have said, yes, we would do a research PhD again, even knowing that I'm not going to end up continuing in research. So that, I think, is very good. And that tells you that we should not think that we have let those students down by not providing them with an academic career, and they have not let us down by leaving academia. Now, I hope that nobody in this room has those values, but the historic academy department view, certainly the view in the Oxbridge view, which is where I come from, is that the weaker students leave, or those who couldn't cut it tend to go, that kind of thing. We must get away from that thinking, because those are often the smarter students. If they look at their future earnings potential, those are often the ones who crave more interesting problems in a new domain. So we really need, part of the culture change is not staying in academia may be a very smart thing to do. It may be best for you. Not everybody's cut out to be an academic. But having some measure of research background or science background, and this goes right back into schools, having an A-level in a science subject, having GCSEs in a science subject, isn't a pair of rails that leads you to being a professor, and if you step off those rails, you've derailed and gone into a problem. This is broad life skills. And so part of what we're trying to do is create a future STEM-aware workforce, but STEM-aware, not just in a certain sector of the economy which does sciencey stuff. A STEM-aware electorate would be a good thing. STEM-aware voters would be a good thing. I would like to know more about what the research issues are in other subject areas myself. And I think we all benefit from, especially when you look at the kind of issues that I just described coming on the scene, where we're all going to have to make informed decisions about future energy supply, future medical technologies, and so on. We would all be better off if we knew a bit more about it. And I think that's really the pitch. But there are very short-term economic drivers here as well. The CEO of Oxford Instruments has talked to us about the number of engineers and technicians that his company will need to employ over the coming few years. And he has said he would like to hire those people from British universities. But if British universities do not graduate that number of people, he will try to recruit them from overseas. If immigration rules do not let him recruit those people from overseas, he will take his manufacturing to where those people are. So if we're talking about an economy that can generate enough taxes and high-skilled jobs and reward to keep us in the style to which we're accustomed, we need to address this problem in the skills supply pipeline as well. So it is about skills in science and engineering, but not only. It's also about STEM being a useful part, a necessary part of being an informed citizen in the modern world.
We're going to have to close the Q&A at that point. If, like me, you haven't had a chance to ask questions.
My apologies.
There will be at least a brief opportunity, I think, after the close of the session to talk to John downstairs. But for now, could you join with me in thanking Professor Womersley?
Thank you very much.
Now, my job now is to introduce Peter McOwan. I think I've done that, Peter. And we sign off on that one.
Okay. Thank you all yet again for coming along to help us celebrate the fantastic work that you are helping us to do here at Queen Mary. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to interpose myself like a rather unpleasant bookend between now and you getting to the drinks and nibbles. Just very quickly to give you some information which may be of use to you, and if you forgive me, a little bit of a reflection. So we are at the stage, as Simon mentioned, of the end of the Catalyst funding from RCUK. We're now moving into a bold new world after this, where we're managing to go through the transition, but building the structures, I think, within the university to help support the work that our staff and students do in public engagement. I think this is a unique institution. I think it's a unique institution in its values, in its history, also in its location. And I'm incredibly proud every time I look at the range of work that we do, about how we've interacted through research with the local community, with communities nationally, internationally, International Space Station, and actually we're in discussions around some stuff with engagement around the moon. So as far as I'm concerned, those are the limits, and the bigger they are, the more interesting kind of stuff that we can do. And I think there's a tremendous talent here and a tremendous excitement in doing that through new people coming in and others deciding to dip their toes into the world of public engagement. And some of the things that I'm particularly proud of is the fact that we have now formally recognised public engagement within the promotion criteria. I'm particularly proud of the fact that we have very active surgeries where people can go along and ask and be advised on support I'm particularly proud of the fact that we now have training in our doctoral colleges so that our students and research assistants are actually coming in as part of their trajectory running through both in humanities and social sciences and sciences, science and engineering, SML and SND, that they are having that option to look at exactly the kinds of skills that were being mentioned there as part of it, and being able to actually take in, as part of PGCAP, a credit-bearing course on public engagement. And we've come a tremendous distance, I think, and partly it's because it's just been very easy here, because it's been supported by friends and colleagues across the place, but also because I have an incredibly talented team, and I thank my lucky stars every morning when I get up to come into work, that I know that they're going to be able to aid and support us.